Tēnā koutou katoa, mihi atu ki a koutou, nau mai haere mai ki te kōrero I tēnei wā. Kia ora te whānau. Very interesting to be here having conversations with my mate, Jen Margaret. And we can't see you, but we know you can see us and you can hear us. So before we kick into the kaupapa I tēnei wā, I'm going to ask Jen to open us with a karakia and then we can get into it. So kia ora.
Tēnā koutou. Just want to open with these words from Dr. Huirangi Waikerepuru. E te hui, pā te mātauranga kia mārama. Kia whaitaki ngā mahi katoa. Tu maia, tu kaha, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou, ia tātou katoa. So for this gathering, acknowledge for understanding, have purpose in all that you do, stand tall, be strong, let us show respect for one another.
Kia pai, kia ora e hoa. Firstly, whānau, before we carry on our kōrero today, just want to take the minute to mihi to all the people who have been involved in creating this space to have these intentional conversations about stuff that's really important, about really important kaupapa. So mihi atu to all the organisations involved, the people who have volunteered their time, all of you for tuning in at this time as well, for all the people that support this kind of kaupapa and the work that surround both myself and Jen that allow us to do what it is that we do and the fabric that we all exist in as a community. So mihi atu ki a koutou. As is always important, it's probably good to know who we are. So ko waia, huri tēnei ngō Ngāti Porou, ko hiku rangi tōku maunga, ko Whaipooti tōku awa, ko Julia amo Whaipooti tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone. I am first and foremost a mokopuna from Ngāti Porou, and I'm also a tūpuna, which is, as we all are, we are mokopuna and tūpuna. We are the grandchildren of those that have walked before us, and we are the ancestors of those to come after us. A little bit about why I'm involved in this mahi. It's a bit funny because it's not a mahi to me, it's just kind of life and what happens when we're breathing. But I think as part of existing as tangata whenua in New Zealand and engaging in the way that we do life here, it's important in the work. I see the importance of this stuff in the work that we do all day, every day. And also a bit of my background, which I always find a bit weird because like reading a CV, but you know, law and background, sort of did that because people said I had a big mouth and I could do that. So I was the first my whānau to go off to law school, but bringing me more directly into the advocacy space that I am part of, particularly around justice kaupapa, being part of an organisation like Just Speak, mahi, doing community lawyering, which is making law and rights accessible to particularly Māori, so always been my focus, and also knowing the inequities that exist in our justice system has been a real driver in the work that I do. At the minute, I'm at the wānanga o Raukawa doing ruma ki te reo Māori with my wife, and mahi at the Children's Commission as well. I'll pass it to my hoa Jen to introduce herself. Bye.
O tēnā koutou katoa. Just want to, support those in tautoko, the mihi that Julia's given to you all for being here and those amazing people who have made this happen. No inarangi, no tēnei makua, no kōtirana o ku tūpuna, I whānau mai a hau I karamata, I te rohi o Kaitaroa heki, e mihi ki a rātou me o rātou whenua, tūtonu. And nānei no hoana Aotearoa I te maru o Tawatawa. I hail from the Canterbury Plains, Danish, Scottish, English ancestry. These days live under Tawatawa, so on the Brooklyn Ridge in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. And so, growing up on the Canterbury Plains and living down near Ōtautahi Christchurch for the early part of my life. Didn't have much awareness, or didn't have any awareness actually, of Te Tiriti-based until I went to university and took a paper in fourth year back in the 90s. And that's when I did my first learning about Te Tiriti, became I suppose I was really angry actually that I hadn't learned about it before, because it just explained so much of what was happening, because that was the time of the Ngāi Tahu settlement. So since that time, been involved in Te Tiriti work, connected with the movements of tangata Tiriti, working alongside tangata whenua to build understanding around our responsibilities in terms of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and critically what that means for the action that we do in our communities, in our workplaces, and the change that we're working for in Aotearoa. So been involved in that on and off for a while. And these days that's, well, until quite recently, it was my full time, just looking at how that changes in this new environment where it's hard to gather directly, because a lot of my work is with groups in a range of spaces around, understanding and action, and particularly being guided and walking alongside tangata whenua, but leading these conversations amongst Pākehā and amongst other tangata Tiriti around, understanding our responsibility and our place. So that's kind of a bit of general background. I can talk a little bit more maybe about this particular kaupapa that we're talking about this afternoon around allies and where that mahi comes from in a bit, but maybe do you want to talk, Julia, to our relationship in terms of us turning up on this for this webinar together?
It's funny when you hear when you realise your bros are like Flash. No, in the mahi you do, Jen. So in placing our relationship in Hohunga together, so about 7 years ago, I was first referred to Jen to help support me in mahi I was doing. So some of you may be aware of the work of Just Speak, but otherwise, if you don't, Just Speak's a youth-led organisation around criminal justice transformation, and tries to encourage young bucks to engage with the brokenness and racism and all of that within our justice system, criminal justice system. And I remember vividly sitting in law class about my second year, and that was about 8 years ago, and then hearing mainly Pākehā talk about why Māori offend so much, because our justice system is full high prison numbers, over half people in prison are Māori, and also a high victimisation of whānau Māori as well. And I was sitting in that room with not many Māori in the room, about 5 of us and about 150 Pākehās, talking about why Māori offend. And it made me feel really uncomfortable at the time. Then it made me feel like it sounded like Māori are inherently criminal, and it made me feel like hoha and sad and all of that stuff. And then I ended up doing, trying to do something about it. And so I started being part of Just Speak, which was this youth-led organisation, predominantly Pākehā law students who set it up, because you hear stuff and they were like, that's wrong too, and they wanted to do stuff about it. And they're all homies and allies in their own right, and lots of them are my good mates still today. So I was doing part of that mahi, and then lots of things happened. I ended up being the chair. It's all voluntary stuff, and I'm still part of the kaupapa. I ended up becoming the chair of Just Speak. And for me, I was struggling with the fact that the imprisonment of Māori and my it hurt me quite personally. And I found that it's hard. It's still hard for me. Like, it's still quite a personal feeling, which I think is really important. But leading an organisation of predominantly Pākehā engaging on this, and I found it difficult because I felt like I'm really upset about this stuff. And then I also felt like being supported and working with Pākehā who were, it felt disconnected in the way that I was connected. And I just didn't know what to do about it. And I have one of my best mates, Kiri Tapualan, I turn to her for guidance, as I often do. Sometimes I listen. And I said, I don't know what to do about this. I feel like this is an important kaupapa, and now I'm the chair as well, and I feel like I've got to lead these people, but I'm kind of hurting, bro. I don't know what to do. And then she said, pretty much was like, here's a Pākehā I prepared earlier. And then she suggested this woman called Margaret, and who was doing mahi with Pākehā. And I was quite young back to this stuff as well. So it's not like you walk around being like, how do I exist in a treaty relationship? But she was like, Jen's been doing this mahi for ages. I'll hook us up for a kai. And then that was in our connection. Our first introduction was actually having a kai at some pub actually down on Featherston Street, I remember. And then Jen came through and we had yarns about it. And Kiri, you know, you've been on the front line with her. as an ally for heaps of years. And so that's where that connection came, and it's been ongoing to the point that at the end of last year, Jen was the celebrant, and we asked her to be the celebrant in my Te Tiriti marriage with my wife, who happens to be Pākehā as well. And so there's lots of things in between, and that was the thing that brought us together, and it's the thing that keeps us together as well. Anything else, Jen?
No.
Right.
Beautifully summarised.
Maybe you want to talk about, so in terms of how we're going to run this session, Whānau, we're just going to have yarns with each other. This isn't quite real time. Like me and Jen, like we can't do this mahi, but you don't walk around being like, how shall I breathe the treaty today? It's like, it's in how we express ourselves to our mahi, and we don't actually ever really get to sit and have intentional kōrero here. So we're going to be talking in real time. We haven't like prepared this speech or anything like that, so it'll be a good time. We also know that there's going to be a Q&A at the end, and you can put your pātai through your questions and we'll engage with them. And if we don't get the chance, this is just a conversation that should be a lifelong conversation for all of us. So we're the experts of our own experiences, and we'll be sharing those with each other and with you here today. And if we don't get the chance to engage with some of your pātai coming through, Jen's volunteered to so offline we'll respond to those and share whakaaro ongoing. Paiana, I'm going to pass you E Hoa to talk about I suppose the genesis of this session and what our kaupapa is I tēnei wā.
Yeah, kapai. So in terms of what we're going to focus on in this session, 0800 Haumi, in a way it's come from a ongoing, as Julia's talked to, our ongoing relationship doing the different mahi that we do in relation to justice and Te Tiriti. And through that, conversations around kind of what can make it really hoha for Māori to work with tangata treaty, and particularly Pākehā in these spaces. And I suppose building on some of the work that I have done in the past around this stuff called working as allies. And that's come out of, I suppose, there's, Te Tiriti Waitangi provides this incredible guide to us in terms of the what of power sharing and relationships, but there's quite a bit of work to be done around like how we are in these relationships, and the allies stuff is about considering how we've been in our relationships to honour and uphold Te Tiriti. And so, as Julia said, it's not a conversation that we kind of do. We're doing the mahi and we don't necessarily sit down and talk about it or do this reflective stuff. But over time, there's been things like, how do we have some conversations around some of the things that are actually quite tricky in this work, but also ground that in some of the why we do it. And so, I think that's probably where we're going to go. So we're going to have, in terms of the session, a bit of reflection on what's on top before moving into talking a little bit about the kind of some of the overarching context of the relationships, and then speaking to some specific examples. And during that time as well, having the opportunity as it fits to be able to respond to questions that you might want to put into the Q&A or the chat.
Ka pai. And just in terms of the kupu haumi, so you said start in Māori, it's Haumi, and that's actually legit means ally. So it's cool because you always want to hang with your homies. So that's how we came up with the name. So today in New Zealand and across the world, there's lots of stuff going on. So we thought it's important to acknowledge that space and what's happening with COVID, and also timely that we can carry on social connections and engagement in this way through Zui, I call it Zui, Zoom Hui, and that allows us to remain connected. It's a really important time when we know that there's quite anxiety inducing and all of that, but our relationships, it gives us a chance to be intentional with our relationships and continue with our learning. And for me at this time, just being really aware that the conversations that Jen and I are having now, and what we're talking about when we talk about honouring Te Tiriti and the treaty and all of that, it comes into light in every decision that's made, and the impact. I know particularly for Māori, having conversations around what does it mean, what happens in COVID. We know that the default health system already fails Māori, doesn't serve us. It has built-in inequities, and that the responses from government and all of that, here's like this many billions of dollars, and if it's not targeted for Māori for us to have, you know, the right to exercise sovereignty and all of that stuff over our own selves, it means that those inequities become amplified during this time. And for me, it's an important time to go, let's all be connected as a people. It also highlights that how in every decision that's made in every day, in crisis or otherwise, that when we don't honour Te Tiriti, that's the starting point and the basis of which every decision is made. And I'm acutely aware of that. Today, the government announced some funding, like $56 million to be targeted for Māori. That's like less than 5% in all the poops here that's been targeted for this whole response. So I'm scared of what that means for us. Really grateful though for the leadership shown up home for me, up on the coast. We've got some nannies who are pretty much ready to patrol the streets to block off people coming in and out, or to make sure that because there's not access for healthcare and all of that for our whānau already out there, and that the susceptibility for Māori, there's lots of health issues and all of that that are attached, that are symptoms from colonisation, blah, blah. So that's on top right now. And I know it'll be sitting on top for everyone else, like in terms of how COVID's affecting everyone. But not to be blind to that, to continue these connections, these conversations, and also my conscious awareness that every decision, we don't park the treaty, and these conversations and opportunities to develop and grow ourselves because something's happening, because that something happens off the foundation of never honouring Te Tiriti as well, in terms of decisions being made and how we exist in Aotearoa. Kaikōrero, what's on top?
Yeah, and I suppose just to amplify what you're saying, I mean, there's lots of things that feels quite scary right now, and one of them is that obviously, you know, we've had a framework in Aotearoa for a right response to any situation since 1840, but it's not been honoured, you know, in terms of Te Tiriti, and it's not being honoured now. So we don't have that implementation happening and the power sharing and decision making happening in the ways that it should be. So yeah, that's something that I think that we all, wherever we sit and are located in these conversations, have a responsibility to be keeping to the fore. And I think it's an important role for tangata tiriti, for non-Māori, to be asking and to be advocating all the time around, you know, how are decisions being made, who's making these decisions, what are the impacts of these decisions for Māori, and ensuring and pushing and advocating for that, because it's as important as it ever was. And I hadn't heard that 56 million figure. I suppose I just reflect on the fact that, you know, last week the kind of announcement about the 56 billion commitment to transport over a 5-year period, you know, or I don't know if it was 5 or 10 years, but, you know, just thinking about those relative amounts and the massive impacts in terms of inequity at this time. So just the need that it's a call for all of us to be really active wherever we are in responding, to be thinking about impacts for tangata whenua.
Yeah, and I mean the thing around, you know, Te Tiriti, and Jen, I mean, you talk about tangata tiriti. I also know not everyone knows what that means.
Oh yeah.
What is that?
That's a term from Sir Eddie Jury from, I think, about 1989 is the first time that I know of it being used, and it's a term that sits alongside tangata whenua, but that's inclusive of all of us who are here by right of Te Tiriti or Waitangi. So losing Jen. Inclusive term for everybody who is here from everywhere in the world who is not tangata whenua. So yeah, and within that, when I'm talking about the ally stuff, I suppose I'll also be clear that there's particular stuff as Pākehā and as part of the colonising culture that is different from experiences of others who sit within that broader kind of relationship as tangata treaty. So often when I'm talking about the ally stuff, I will be talking more specifically about white people and Pākehā, yeah.
Cheers. That's good. I think also when you were talking about like the 55 million that's been targeted for Māori today, for the COVID stuff, and then looking at how much was chucked at transport? 55
billion.
Lots of money, billions of monies. And for me, you know, what always happens is that, so like with Te Tiriti context, it's around power and decision making and who has control to make decisions and who has the resources to implement the decisions. And I have permanent horehaness around, you know, like the announcement around the $55 million today. They're like, man, we're doing this because we know Māori have unique problems that just came out of nowhere, apparently, but it's colonisation, guys. Colonisation, all of that stuff. We didn't just get bad health and then bad like access to healthcare and then bad, you know, get locked up and all that stuff. That didn't just happen anyway, so I'm getting triggered. But that the words are right around, oh yes, no, we need to support Māori so that they can lead themselves. But then the resourcing allocation that's like $2. It's like $2 in how, you know, the default settings all happen. And so for me, like, I'm always, this is what Te Tiriti unhonoured looks like every day, you know, and even when they do a good thing for us and help us, thanks guys, thanks government, thank you so much, that it's actually nothing. It just entrenches the inequities and now, and how I think the corona, I call it the coronavirus, well, it came from somewhere else, but that means the Crown, how the Crown engaged in their treaty obligations with us as Māori. What were we talking about today, Jen?
What we're talking about, we're talking about many things, but one of them is just around these relationships as haumi, as allies. And I was going to talk to, I suppose, just a couple of things in terms of overarching ways that we come to this conversation. And one is that in terms of some of the background to the work that I've done in this area is drawing on conversations that I've had with people doing, non-Indigenous people working in support of Indigenous rights in Canada and Australia and here in Aotearoa, and reflecting on their experiences. And those conversations were with people, more with individuals or people who are part of particular groups and movements. But a lot of the parts of the conversations have relevance for people, you know, like tangata treaty organisations working alongside, you know, tangata whenua. So they've got a broader kind of application. And one of the things that I think is important in these conversations, and we might keep coming back to it, is that it's often, when we think about change and Te Tiriti honouring, the importance of recognising, as you've just been talking to, you know, the structural stuff and the way that structures are colonised structures right now in terms of the way the government works, for instance. But then within that, if people are working, Pākehā, for instance, to challenge the injustice for Māori, there's obviously personal stuff in terms of how we act as people. And so we're going to talk a little bit kind of, I suppose, about the intersection of those things, because we're not going to change that structural picture unless we also are doing the work individually to build a different kind of collective. And so as we go, recognising that sometimes the focus ends up being too much, well, that we're acting as individuals within this broader colonised context. And in that colonised context, it's a messy space, right? Because we've had 180 years of colonisation. And so how do, for instance, Pākehā work in ways that don't, if we're working to support justice, that we don't reinforce and reinscribe kind of the injustice and the dominance, when actually everything in our communities reinforces us working in kind of dominant white ways.
Absolutely.
So doing that.
we've just got a pātai from Papa, which I think is on point. Tēnā koe, she says, Julia, how do you keep safe when faced with racist whakaaro trying to hide as inquisitive perspectives, and how do your haumi support you in those situations? And I think what Jen was just talking about, you know, like how Pākehā, or well-meaning people, so many well-meanings, that intersection between what does it mean personally, like how am I personally, and how do I benefit within a system and a structure, and what is the role within all of that, and Jen will talk about that. But at the face of this question, you know, I often get questions from people, Pākehā, who people don't go, okay, I'm going to ask a racist question right now. They go, I'm going to ask a question that would only be asked of me because I'm Māori, and wouldn't be asked of non-Māori. For example, and also in terms of my own personal responses to those things, I see myself as a real privileged in my ability to walk in both worlds as Māori and existing in Pākehā. Although in order to exist in Pākehā, that's not necessarily like a privilege in the sense that like I'm really grateful for it. So I didn't have a choice about that stuff, but then grateful that I know how to navigate that space, and I see myself with that privilege as a responsibility as to how I engage both with between, you know, in the Te Tiriti space. When we get asked questions, so recurring questions, for example, had someone in the sphere of my life, Māori, be asked whether or not they went to university, for example. So the question, the underpinning that is like, are you qualified to, you know, how qualified are you to do the work that you're doing? But that was asked really innocently. And I know that if that wouldn't be asked of non-Māori, that sort of question and what we're up to in a week. I feel I'm fine to engage in those places. I know who I'm accountable to in terms of, I'm really clear about who I serve, which is our mokopuna and Māori. I always ask the question, how do I serve Māori, and what spaces do I engage in with tauiwi, which is every day. I mean, my wife's Pākehā. I say that, but you can't say that your wife or partner's Māori. But, you know, like, this is just the reality of doing that. I'm very comfortable in who supports me and how I'm held up, but I know that not every Māori has that. And it's really difficult when you're faced with barrages of questions every day, and you just, everyday racism and the burden sometimes of existing as Māori, it's just being who we are, that can be really hard sometimes. But the role of our haumi, I refer a lot of people to Jen, that is like straight up, or to like, I call it my Pākehās in the world, to be like, these are great questions you fellas are asking, and actually you fellas need to be engaging with it, have space to talk about it amongst yourselves. It's not always for us as Māori to answer questions. I think I went in off on the tangent there, but do you have anything to add to that, Jen?
I suppose I'd just pick up on that last point about the importance of there being spaces for Pākehā, for instance, to have conversations that allow some unpacking of some of the issues without taking out space and energy from tangata whenua, who frankly have got other things that they'd rather be thinking about. I think it's a great question around how, you know, the sort of naive inquiry stuff, I've seen it play out in workshops, for instance, is used, and it is really it's really problematic, actually. And so being able to identify and name that stuff, and I think it's some of the conversation we've had at other times, Judy, about some of the questions that get asked of you. And I just think sometimes in terms of these things, it's like, is that a question that you would ask anybody? You know, like some of the questions, it's like, how do we even, you know, that's a question that needs to be asked of the questioner. Like, just, okay, is that a reasonable question to ask of somebody?
And that can be really hard as personally, as Māori, to respond to that. For myself, it can be, you feel like whakama, you feel embarrassed, or you feel like, it's like a ping that happens in my puku, where I'm like, oh, it's uncomfortable. This wasn't actually appropriate to ask me. Lots of people are going to get asked this stuff. Do I say something, and how do I say it? Like, a lot of my energy goes into how to say things constructively and cushion my feedback. I spend a lot of energy doing that. For example, like one of the examples, you know, I get asked to do, to give keynotes or talks about stuff on Cope Up With That I've been advocating on and all of that, and I'm all good. And also some of those reasons why I get asked, there's partially, you know, I'm a Māori and speak and blah, blah, so I get asked to do lots of stuff. But one time I got invited to do a keynote against, I'd say, with like important grown-ups, Pākehā, I say that, like think legal world, think like judges and whatever. And there were not many of us. There was like 3 or 4 or something. And then the day before or the like few days before the actual presentation of whatever talk thing, flash thing, it was a flash dinner thing, I got an email asking me and another mate who wasn't talking but was sort of part of, involved somehow, but who was also Māori, and there weren't many of us, and the email asked if I would feel comfortable presenting some taonga to the other speakers or as something, because it's appropriate to do it because it's Māori, you know, to do it in a culturally appropriate way and all of that kind of stuff. The issue with that was, and also I just want to take time, you know, there are people you could be cringing right now and be like, shit, I've done, oh sorry, are we allowed to say, oh, well, too bad, it's sworn. Like, oh, I've done that to people, I've asked Māoris to do things just because they're in the room. That might even be like, can you open with a karakia? But it was actually, I was being invited as a manuhiri, as a guest, to present my, give a presentation based on my own experiences and do stuff. And then because I was doing that and I'm Māori, was then asked to then fill in the space as a what I would consider quite tokenistic and presentatory, because I was going to be there and because I was Māori. And that's not appropriate, because the other people would never have been asked to do that stuff. And especially as I'm being invited as a guest into that space. It was, but we had to give feedback. We knew we were going to say no, but we had to do that in a way that was to whakamana and support, you know, to be constructive in our why we weren't going to do it, why I wasn't comfortable doing that, and why it also wasn't appropriate doing that, and also try and educate at the same time for them to reflect on in the future, to think twice. Would you ask this of anyone else? Would you ask a similar sort of question to anyone else? And the answer is often no, but it's hard. It takes a lot of energy to do that. Yeah. And we talked about that, Jen? I was talking to you at the moment, because actually what happened is, like, you turn to your homies. I sent them email, because I get lots of random stuff. Ask a Māori a question. And part of that's, I was going to say, part of it's my responsibility. It's like sort of my fault. I accept my role, like I'm very, make sure I'm publicly speaking on stuff. I feel comfortable being uncomfortable. Like, I'm very much driven by what feels the right thing, and I'm comfortable speaking to issues even when it's really, really uncomfortable. And I feel uncomfortable often, and people are surprised by that, because they think, oh, but you're such a good speaker and you're such a blah blah. It actually is still hard work and it takes a lot of energy, but I recognize that not all of our whānau and people get, you know, the platforms to speak or to be heard. And so my responsibility to my own whānau and people is to try and articulate stuff in the best way that I possibly can.
Can I just pick up on that around discomfort, because I think it's a really interesting thing for people who are of colonizer, you know, culture, because one of the things is that rightness is kind of hardwired into us, you know, like we come from of lines that sort of have come here with our ideas, and those ideas being the dominant ones that get imposed on tangata whenua. So a kind of assumption that obviously the tangata whenua ideas are not as good. You know, that's all of that stuff that's hardwired into colonization. And so actually not knowing and not being right is a pretty unfamiliar space generally, if you have the privilege of being in the dominant culture. And so discomfort is critical to engaging in this work for Pākehā, but it's also something that our broader cultural context of you know, sitting within a colonising culture doesn't really equip us for or give us much experience in. And so actually being aware, I think, of all the ways that can require that, you know, all the ways that we can react to that discomfort, which can be withdrawing or can be, you know, trying to reinsure or taking up too much space. Those are all those things, rather than just kind of sitting with it. And one of the people that I talked to in Canada who had this great thing of saying, you know, if you feel uncomfortable, it means that you're doing the work. And so actually, understanding those feelings is a really important thing. It's a very different thing, experience with Pākehā than for Tangata Whenua. And so, but it's part of the stuff that Pākehā need to work with.
I believe, I truly like, I often speak with Pākehā to be like, sit with your discomfort in the moment. Things can be really confronting in the moment. But my advice often is just sit with it, and then, you know, have the space to wānanga and ask why that is. And the feelings are real. How do you balance that, Jen, in your like when you're often the only Pākehā when there's heaps of Māori in the room, and talking about like your tupuna and your ancestors who stole our land, which is true, but and you know, the burden of all of that. How do you not react defensive, or you do? What do you do with those feelings to make it useful? And it hurts, right? You have good feelings around all that stuff as well. What do?
You just got to hear it, you know, and not understand that stuff. And it's I think that those I mean, I had an experience quite early on in my days of being involved in this work where, you know, I got a new job. It was for an organisation that had a reputation in the community that I hadn't kind of done my research around to fully understand how racist that organisation was. Went out to the first community meeting and had someone really, you know, kind of call out that racism, and obviously directed at me because I was the representative of that organisation, and I did have my little voice going, oh no, but you know, I care about the treaty, you know. I didn't have my, you know, badge on that day, but my reflection on that was like, well, you know, I'm getting paid by that racist place. I need to hear. And I think that's one of the things for Pākehā, recognising that in any of these engagements we carry all of that history of and not only the history, the everyday stuff of pain and damage of colonisation, and so we just have to be able to, you know that we are doing what we can to address that, to shift and to advocate for treaty honouring and for justice, but at the same time, understand the picture and know. So I think there's something about recognising the personal stuff that you do need to take responsibility around how you're acting, but also, again, all of that bigger picture of colonisation. And the only way I see is just to be doing the actions that you can in your space to shift things.
And how do you balance that? So when we talk about, you know, the colonisation, for me, that's living and breathing. That lives inside our prisons, that lives in the inequities in our education, that lives in what I call, you know, our children being stolen into the state, all of that stuff as Māori. And that's what colonisation looks like. It looks every day. Every day colonisation is breathing. But where do you sit with the intersect between like the personal and the structural, Jen? So you're like, you're good. You're a good Pākehā, but there's heaps of good Pākehā, and that doesn't mean you I often get confronted sometimes of heaps of woke people, and that's awesome. Like I see, everyone's on a journey where they want to support me as Māori because I'm Māori, and they want to support stopping the other Pākehā from doing the harm that's happening. So there's a structural or lack of knowledge around actually just by existing as Pākehā you benefit in New Zealand. Doesn't remove a personal hardship or anything like that. But how do you deal with that, the personal and the structural? How would you explain that? I know it's your mahi and everyone needs to sort of know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things in there. So there's the personal and the structural stuff, but there's also the good Pākehā stuff, and other people have kind of written about that work as well. But I think it is about recognizing that every day, regardless of what you do, you're privileged. You know, I speak for me. I'm privileged by colonisation, and that's a daily lived experience. And actually, acting to change that doesn't change my daily privilege immediately. You know, like working for that over time. But it's holding that knowledge, I think, of or that understanding of both those things, because I think there's challenges because people, and that's why I feel like so privileged that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is there, that holds a vision of an honourable relationship, because it's difficult to act from places of negativity, and to pull that stuff apart, to pull colonisation apart, if people feel like there's no kind of anchor, you know. And for me, I think that Te Tiriti o Waitangi does provide an anchor, only if we honour it, you know. So I don't. Does that kind of make sense around that?
Yeah, it did. That's good.
I'm seeing there's a heap of really exciting questions on the chat. I don't know if we want to turn our eyes to them, but I really realise that there are heaps. There was an early one around using the term white. I don't know if we want to go that one.
Do you want to read it and respond? There's another one. I mean, while you're thinking about that, I might just respond to one of them about the difficulty responding to racist comments. So for me, racism is it's so visibly invisible always. So and people often confronted with like, oh, is that, you know, the word racism? But how that looks every day. I mean, that looks like. The overt racism is the easy stuff. So when someone, you know, the easy stuff has been like, oh, I don't like, this is just a simple way of me saying this, like, oh, I don't like black people, I don't like Māoris, or I don't like, that's easy to deal with because that's honest. For me, racism, the hard stuff is when it's just so veiled and it's questions that work off the assumption that there's something, you know, inherently dumb or inherently dumb in Māori. And I get asked questions all the time or comments made, especially because I always find myself on panels and all of that. The point I want to make in responding to, responding to racist stuff is really hard. And it gets tiring and it hurts. It's a burden. You've got to find ways to whakawā and sort your own stuff out. And I know who I'm accountable to and where I go to for support. But I take the privilege very much so of me being able to occupy spaces and respond on behalf of all of Māoridom, which is often, I mean, I was on I'm on Pākehā News often responding and being the Māori who's speaking, which means I'm speaking for Māori. But the one thing I want to say is that there are Māori who do not and should not have to make things okay or have the words or solutions or be able to articulate what the problem is in some kind of like real formal way. Like when Māori come out and say fuck you, or like, you know, I hate the government, I hate Pākehās or whatever, that comes from a place of like lived everyday hurt and like generations deep. And so I see that there's some people can't respond well to racist stuff. I have to, because that's my responsibility and I feel that sense, but I have such grace for our whānau who do not and should not have to respond with the same grace. But as Pākehā being confronted by both a Julia response and whānau who may not want to be graceful and shouldn't have to be, those are the times to sit in those spaces and be like, okay, this is uncomfortable and it feels not fair. On a personal level, that's true, but actually just got to kind of sit with that stuff. Anyway, that's what I kind of wanted to say about that. Jen, you're a white person. no, it's going to that partai about being white.
Oh, but The question is, was just some interest in how we're using the term white to refer to Pākehā and allies, and that some people react around that term, I think, you know, and feel threatened by it. I mean, I think whiteness talks to structures of power and privilege, and so to, you know, you can talk about Pākehā privilege in the context of Aotearoa. So it's those ways that power is an unearned advantage works for people. I mean, the term whiteness obviously is one that's used often in the American context. And I think one of the challenges around it is that people understand it or think about it as skin colour, when it's really just, it's about those systems of power. So Pākehā privilege is probably more useful in the context of here, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have something more to say on that? Because it's going to go to another pātai.
Oh, no. I was just coming back to the responding to racism and thinking of the allies' role in that, because I sometimes think that we don't realise how every day some of this change work can be as allies, and it is about, you know, those conversations that we have in our families, in our communities, and all of those places to challenge racism, and around the Pākehā responsibility for that. And I think it's a different thing if we're all in the room together, that Pākehā need to be really careful not to be kind of taking space or speaking for Māori in those spaces, but
you got to say
that there's a real role to be moving the, you know, and challenging racism in all our.
I agree. I mean, one of the things that I say is the kaputi. Oh no, I think I heard Annette Sykes talk one time around the changes that happen around the kaputi table. So for Pākehā, you get to hang out with way more Pākehā way more often, and that's often your uncles and your aunties and your mum, your dad, your siblings, yourselves, and facilitating. It's by facilitating, it's like you are present in conversations that you can challenge and should regularly, because the way that racism permeates around our dinner tables is all day, every day. And also we don't talk about, you know, I sort of want to talk about reverse racism, but we might get stuck there for a while. There's a pātai here, Jen, that I think was good, because you and I were having yarns about this around the use of te reo, and is that a tool that haumi or Pākehā allies, forget what the question is, but it's essentially something about, do you view using te reo Māori as being a Pākehā haumi? I might start with my own, can I start with my reckons?
Right.
This is a really important thing, and for my own stuff, like, the te reo, it is not just a language. It comes with an understanding of the history, our tikanga, and also the history that has taken away our tongue as Māori. So I talk about, right now, me and my wife, Pākehā wife, have enrolled to do immersion Māori to find the time, so that, and our journeys will be different, our reasons are different, but for me as a Māori woman, I'll speak for myself only, would be something is missing from me because I can't speak the language of my tupuna. I'm a mokopuna, which means I'm the moko, I'm the reflection of my tupuna. And so I will be a tupuna as well for our mokopuna that will come in the future, but I don't have their voice. I'm not able to speak our language in the way that is inside of me. So I know that, and that's really painful. But what's also, in terms of Pākehā using it, it can, sometimes I've seen it being used as a patu, so where it's like Pākehā now have this new, I've engaged with people who have te reo Māori, and it can be really confronting for me with my own, in my own deficit, I suppose. I mean, that's something I feel is like I don't have my reo, and then you have Pākehā come up and they'll use all the reo that they have, and it feels like being used on me. That's how it feels personally. And so I think as Pākehā, and Emma, my wife, thinks about this, like, how do we engage, knowing the sort of history that has taken away the reo, that how can that be confronting and be used sometimes, or feel like it's been used on Māori? but the importance of still learning it. So I don't think it is a haumi tool in and of itself. It can be a haumi weapon, or that's an oxymoron because you can't be a haumi and use a weapon on us, but it can be really confronting. You know, I've had some times where like Pākehā are paid to teach us our own language, and that's really challenging for me personally. It feels really hard. So I think that there's a responsibility on Pākehā who are learning or have the reo, and have not many Māori have the privilege and time or to engage with our own language, and it's scary. It's just a way more scary challenge of addressing what's, I feel naked, and it's like now I need to find and build my own clothes back up again so that I'm more of who I am. And that's a different thing than, like, say for you, Jen, like I won't speak for you, but I imagine it's different. Like, you don't feel inadequate because you can't speak the language of your ancestors.
No, I feel like it's pretty, you know, it's a lack of this country that we can't all speak it, and it's a very different impact, obviously, for you than it is for Pākehā. But it's also, you know, the fact that the dominance of English in this country is wrong. You know, it's not the language of this whenua. So I think that in terms of Pākehā learning, like, you know, it's hard to have good relationships if you can't say the name of your partner properly. So there's work to do, and there has been calls from lots of places for Pākehā to be involved in, you know, learning te reo. But there's so much care that is needed in that. And so I think it's really problematic if Pākehā are learning te reo without understanding colonisation and how it works, without understanding and checking their own privilege. So it can't, I think that learning is critical to go together. And then just the awareness of what it means to have Māori trust you and invest in you in terms of learning te reo, and then knowing that that's going to be being really aware of the different contexts that you're then in, and that you then use te reo in.
And also, Māori, we're not like one size fits all. And I've been in situations where, you know, you have Pākehā saying, oh, well, I spoke with this kaumātua and he said it's okay that I do this thing. And then I might have an allergic reaction, or other Māori might have an allergic reaction, depending on the context. Like, for example, if Pākehā does a karanga, I found it really challenging. It's like really hard. But then I'm in that moment in time, you know, but then also at the same time that Pākehā's been supported by they've heard, oh, well, actually this kaumātua said that it was okay for me. It's understanding that in any time, in any point in time, that you're going to be, you will be challenged. And again, it's to sit in the discomfort and be aware of the power structure. I see we have a apartheid that was just from Catherine Delahunty, kia ora te rangatira, kia ora whaia. Around that stuff you were saying, Jen, around do you observe Pākehā wanting to study te reo as another position rather than learning about Te Tiriti because it's harder? I think you kind of answered that question in some ways. But
and I do worry that, you know, some of the way that the responses to Te Tiriti have been taken up, particularly in organisational spaces, like often, you know, organisations going, oh, well, we've started on our treaty journey, we've started te reo classes, and I'm like, whoa, you know, we need to be starting with, do people understand the history and the current manifestations, daily impacts of colonisation, and also understand Te Tiriti and what that means in terms of how we might be in relationship, because I think that's just critical to engaging.
Kia ora. Jen, I'm giving us a time check. We've got like 6 minutes for word cuts. So
where did that go?
Also, I mean, someone from comment from Alice around the dial a Māori, where Māori can get hit up to be like, can you translate this? By well-meaning Pākehā wanting to do the stuff. I think what's really important is to recognise the expertise as Māori being Māori, and for those who have our reo and our tikanga and all of that, don't ask for free stuff. We get bombarded all the time, get hit up. There's some things like Jen can ask me for free stuff because I ask her for free stuff. You know, it's about relationships and connections. But Māori, I often get hit up for advice about stuff from Pākehā all the time because I'm an accessible Māori. And I don't think it's appropriate. I think if you've got the tools to recognise the time of Māori as something that's valuable, would you ever hit up some random like accountant and be like, can you give me, can you just go through my taxes quickly and have a look at this? But Māori, we get asked questions that are cumulative. So you might ask me one question, but you multiply that by about like the 20 requests. I get like heaps of slide into my DMs. They're not like sexy slide-ins, you know, people slide in, they want to hit me up or whatever, but it's usually hitting up around, hey, what do you think, is this the right thing to do for Māori or under the treaty, or should I do this? And those things, some are really strongly relationship based and you engage with that, but when I think there's an importance to know when you're engaging with Māori to ask those questions, to stop and think what you're asking, and how you value that person's time.
And I think there's also the assumption, like, you know, the assumption around, well, Julia's Māori, I'll ask her about the new name for my organisation, you know. It's like, so there's also checking the assumptions as well as valuing the time. And and I think there's a real thing, we've talked about it before, right? You know, the 0800 dialer Māori, and it's just like, please don't, because that's not the question to be asking. So it comes back to some of that stuff around, would you thinking before making those approaches?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because Jen and I, we've got a bunch of mates, and you know, it's me and one of my mates who's Māori, and then there's about 5 Pākehā in the group, including Jen, my wife, and some other our mates, and we call it the Cultural Advisors Group because just so I can funnel in a lot of my requests. Sometimes I just funnel it there so you can have a lull, because you need to be able to breathe. We just need space to breathe and to feel like sort of okay and all of that stuff. But it's funny to seek my Pākehā mates, I seek cultural advice from them, but that's often not seen as the norm. So Aotearoa, we're going to be running out of time soon, so maybe we do our last reckons. You've got a 40-second last reckons, and then we're going to have to whakakapi our hui tēnei wā, but just important whānau. This is just a lifelong conversation that needs to happen. This is not something that ends with our just like yarns that we just had now in real time. And any of the questions are going to be captured as well that you've put into the chat, and Jen's volunteered to do some mahi and respond to stuff afterwards as well. So Aotearoa, it feels like it's kind of funny. We've never just sat down and had yarns like this. Like, we talk about stuff all the time. We talk about racism and blah, blah, all the time, just because it's not, you know, shit happens every day. But having the time, it's kind of flown by quite quickly. Is there anything, what do you want people to know, Jen? What do you want all the Pākehās to know?
I want to speak on behalf of all the Pākehās. I just want to thank everybody who has been here, actually, and really, and obviously you, but everybody for and all of those who've made it happen, and say that we will. For people who are keen to hear, there is stuff on the Groundwork website, and the Allies book is there for background in terms of, because there's actually some really thoughtful stuff in there, some ideas. So if you're a Pākehā in that space, then do encourage that ongoing reading. And we're keen to kind of be able to try and follow up and keep spaces for these conversations or reflections happening. So just he mihi nunui kia koutou katoa.
Tino tautoko. I'm like, encourage all our allies. I always say, don't be an ally, be an accomplice. So it's not just cheering from the side. Get in there and help, do the mahi, so we can all get the treats. Jen's working with the allies as a main book for Pākehās. I love just raining it out, and just mihi atu kia koutou. We're all in this together, actual, and we need to close now. We'll close how we started. Jen, I'm going to ask you to whakakapi us with our karakia, and we can close this time and continue our conversations over cups of tea. Kia ora whānau.
Kia ora koutou. In terms of our Karakia whakakapi, again, it is Dr. Huirangi Waikiraparu's words. Ko muta a mātou mahi mo tēnei wā. Manakitia mai mātou katoa. O mātou hoa, o mātou whānau. Aio ki taorangi. So our work's finished for the moment. Bless us all, our colleagues, our families. Peace to the universe.
Hei hei, mauri ora, kia ora whānau, take care out there, look after each other as we have physical distance, but we can be socially connected. Mihi atu ki a koutou.